Well, good afternoon, everybody. I guess depending on the time zone. Good day to everybody. I'm Bryan Slone. I'm the president of the Nebraska State Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the NE Chamber, and it's a treat today to talk about something that's new in terms of our Nebraska Chamber Foundation. And actually, our Nebraska Chamber Foundation is relatively new. This foundation was just set up in the last few years. One of its principal purposes is to provide nonpartisan data and research that's available to people within the state, principally around economic matters. And one of the first things that the Nebraska Chamber Foundation has done is to provide data in what I think is a little easier and more understandable fashion, and that is updated, excuse me, on a regular basis. Today, I'm joined by Michael Church. Michael's the CFO of eIMPACT, which is the company that has helped produce the data that you're going to see today and continues to create this dashboard data site for the Nebraska Chamber Foundation. You can find that website dashboard at nechamber.com, then click on the foundation. And in the foundation, when you go to our foundation landing page, you will see a link to the Nebraska Economic and Workforce Dashboard, and you can bring up that dashboard at any time. It is updated from time to time as there's new data. Michael from eIMPACT, Michael's had 20 years of experience, investment and corporate finance. He enjoys the technology environment. Michael's something that I'm not always that good at anymore. And your company, I've seen a lot of your work across the country. Your company does a very good job of reducing data to very understandable and digestible bytes. We're going to have Michael take us through some of that today. Before we start, I would like to thank our sponsors for this dashboard. We have two particular sponsors for this specific dashboard. One is Balin and the other is Novozymes. So thank you to our sponsors. Michael, I'm going to ask you to share, if you will, the dashboard from your screen. So we can take a look at some of this data that you're compiling and keeping current for us.
That sounds great, Brian. Thanks for that intro. Yeah, it's actually been a pleasure of ours to work with you and your team, Brian. Everyone's been very responsive, and putting together these regional dashboards, especially at the state level, is always very interesting for us. And I can say that, in looking at data throughout the country, Nebraska definitely has a lot of things to be proud of here. And I think that'll showcase as we kind of move through this dashboard. So before we get started, is there a particular order you'd like me to start with here, Brian, or shall we just start at the top and move through?
Let's give everybody just sort of a top level scan of the slides that we have. There's a few that we'll stop on and talk some more. Obviously, a lot of the data right now, and a lot of the data, and why I think this dashboard of yours is so important. If we go to our members right now and we say, what's your number one issue? They'll say workforce. And I ask them what the number two issue is, and they'll say workforce. And if you ask them what the number three issue, they'll say workforce. There's a lot of great data here on workforce. So as we just kind of, if you could just show us at a top level what kinds of things you have in this dashboard, and then I'm going to stop you at some specific points, and we're going to talk about some of this workforce data. And I'd like to get your insights, because you not only do this kind of work for Nebraska, but for a lot of cities, counties, and states across the country. And I'd like to get your thoughts on some of this. So why don't you just kind of take us through what you've got in the dashboard?
That sounds like a great approach. Okay. So at the top here, again, a shout out to the sponsors here of this dashboard. They're featured right here with the active link to their sites. I think you can follow my mouse. I'll sort of highlight it here too as I go along. So the idea of this dashboard, and just to reiterate what Brian said, yeah, workforce is on the minds of all at this point. It's dynamically changing, and up-to-date data is critical as we see it, and all the partners and customers that we work with, like Leadership Nebraska. So that will be a focal point as we move through this dashboard. So just a few takeaways here at the top, self-explanatory. Then we've got a section on demographics that shows historical 5-year population and job trend, as well as projected job trend and population growth.
Michael, I'm going to stop you here, even though we didn't plan this. I'm going to do a very quick stop. Look at those bars. I mean, population is growing not at a bad level, and actually in the recent couple of years, just a little bit faster than the national average. The job growth isn't as fast though. So we're growing population and jobs are not growing quite as fast. I'm going to guess, and it's an unfair guess because I've seen the data that comes later, that part of the issue is that while we're growing population, it's getting older. And so we're not necessarily growing workforce as fast as we're growing our population. Are you seeing that across the country, or is there a lot of differential across the country?
No, that's true. We're definitely seeing that. I mean, certain areas are more predominantly affected with that than others, but you know, there is this whole aging demographic of the baby boomers right now, and I'm sure many of you have seen the population, just the workforce inversion that is sort of at the wave that's on the horizon, so to speak. And it does speak to that. You're exactly right, Brian. So we are seeing, I mean, just nationally, and actually most, I will even say beyond domestic, most Western countries are seeing aging population in that baby boomer generation. And we really haven't seen the replacement workforce in the younger generations. So this is an issue that's coming to bear, you know, in our country specifically, and Nebraska is, it seems to be following suit here. I will say though, you know, Nebraska does seem like one of the population, at least as we see it over the next 5 years, it is growing. You can see here at a faster pace as we project it out than the national average. And that does speak to some of the migration that we've seen from the coastal cities to more affordable areas. And whether that's driven by retirement, again, circling back to your aging population driver, I guess is sort of yet to be seen, but we'll keep updating data and hopefully get answers to that as we move along.
Well, Michael, I'm all too familiar with that boomer generation. I wish I was in that 18 to 34 category, but I don't think I qualify. So take us on through. You've got one here on educational attainment.
Yeah, educational attainment. This is just a quick donut chart of where Nebraska sits overall as a state in terms of educational attainment. So you can hover over this as you all navigate to the URL that I believe will be shared with everyone later. But as you hover, you can see, you know, the different education levels and percentage of the population.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to this one later, but that no degree issue, including high school. There's over 100,000 people in Nebraska that do not have, adults who don't have a high school diploma. That's at 15.5%. I'm going to come back to that later. That's an important category of where we start to solve our workforce problems. So go ahead through the slides.
Great point. Yeah, the next slide here is population change by age group, and this is one of the most interesting visualizations I think that we have to kind of address that population issue in terms of breaking down the population in 5-year age cohorts. So we've designed this software where it's sortable just like any Excel table. You can sort it by clicking the header, either in ascending or descending order. So with one click, you can sort of get a different view of things here. For instance, here in this far right column, the percent change, if you want to see, you know, what 5-year age cohort of the population changed the most percent-wise, you can simply click on this header and see that it is indeed, Brian, to your point, the 70 to 74-year-olds. However, we do have, to provide a little bit more context to that, we also provide the absolute values on the cohort itself. So it's not the highest absolute number of age cohort within the population, but it is growing the fastest.
Michael, we've always known, and I love this ability to break it down by growth and deficit growth in the population. We've known for some time the data in Nebraska was suggesting we were losing people, particularly in their early 20s. And so it's been sort of this informal economic development policy. Well, we'll get them back when they have kids. That happens to some extent. You can see it in the data, but not nearly enough. I'll tell you the data point that jumped out at me that I didn't know here is look at those numbers, 50 to 59 years old. Those are pretty significant losses for that entire decade of people in their 50s. I don't know the answer to this one, but boy, I think it's one we've got to explore. Why are we losing so many people right at the peak of their work productivity and their income levels? Are we losing them to lower tax states? Are we losing them because of jobs in other states? We're not attracting the right kinds of jobs at those levels. This is something we got to take a deep look at, but I suspect that taxes do have a piece of this action.
Yeah, those are all great points. I do find encouragement, and it is hard to speak to that. You guys, being in the state, are far more knowledgeable about speaking to a particular age cohort here. But I will say that relative to some of the things we're seeing, especially in the large urban areas, it is promising. We look at this, a foundation of any economy in an area, no matter what the regional geofencing of it is, but it's very cool to see within a whole state that you have what we would consider a baseline of your economy not leaving the state at the younger age that you were mentioning earlier, Brian. So this 25 to 29-year-old, that's actually a growing population. So it looks like you're keeping them out of college. And that is I think that's worth noting. A lot of areas, that may have great educational institutions, they see this particular age cohort in their population leaving the state after they're educated. So I'm encouraged personally by the 25 to 29-year-old growth, this 30 to 34-year-old growth. These are the age cohorts, at least as we see it, where they're starting families, they're buying homes, they're really ramping up their spending. And from a multiplier effect in the economy, it's really great to see that you guys are retaining and actually growing this population.
Yeah, Michael, where I'm coming down on this one is I agree with you. And I think that, but what it demonstrates is I think what we knew, Nebraska is a great place to raise a family. There just isn't a better place in the world. And it shows in the numbers. But I'm going to go back to my earlier comment. I think we're successful there, but these 50-year-olds are empty nesters by and large. What is it that's driving empty nesters away? And I think it's an important thing to take a look at, and something that before I saw this data, I wasn't as focused on. We're still focused on how do we keep 18 to 34-year-olds, because that's still the bread and butter, and the blueprint process, really focused on that. But I think we've got another issue here with empty nesters. It's something that I want to take a look at this summer and get into the data a little deeper.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating. One thing that I would just throw out as a potential data point that we haven't proven out yet, but it is kind of a theory that we have here. And that is with the effect of COVID. We have seen indications of this particular age group, Brian, that have picked up stakes and relocated to help their children with their newer children. So in other words, younger grandparents leaving to help with watching grandkids. with COVID and some of the childcare closures and things like that. So I guess we'll see how that all plays out. But it's nonetheless an area that will be interesting to drill down to more.
Okay, well,
pass what you learn along to us, and we'll
okay,
we'd be fascinated to
we'll keep watching. We'll also keep watching your dashboard on this. So take us on through the dashboard.
Okay. So the next section here is consumer spending. These are data that we collect throughout the pandemic. It's baselined to the first week of January, and this is on a 7-day moving average. So we look at different areas in the economy within Nebraska here, obviously, but how spending trend has improved or at least evolved throughout the pandemic. So if you, just from a user interface perspective, if you highlight here on where you can see my bullet here, the labels are on the right side of this chart, and it will isolate the chart, even though it looks like a lot of spaghetti here until you do that. But once you isolate it, you can kind of see some of the spending here. So I won't say much more on this. This is just spending. Hey, Michael, all.
Two things on this one. Go to spend all again.
Mm-hmm.
Remarkable for Nebraska, and this really, when you think about it, the strength of our economy through the COVID pandemic. I mean, strong consumer spending throughout, and we truly have, I think, one of the top economies coming out of the pandemic, and I think this shows it. But show that spending remote number, the next one. Look at the spending remote number. Incredibly strong spending remote. I'm sure this was a national average too, but one thing, when the legislature passed collecting sales taxes on remote spend a few years ago, that turned out to be really timely because it's had a pretty dramatic effect on our state tax revenues, which actually continue to exceed forecast. But take us on through your slides here.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll just highlight what we have here. This is a spend groceries, remote, as you mentioned, and then we do have the in-person spend to hold sort of up against the remote spend. Next section is employment. So yeah, we're getting down here to the workforce, Brian, that you talked about. This jobs by industry, same user layout. So we've got this table where you can sort by simply clicking the headers here. So this is basically showing on a 2-digit NAICS level industry data and jobs tied to those industries. A 5-year change here from 2016 to 21. The change is highlighted here on a percent basis. And then location quotient is something that we just give some relative perspective to the industry within the area. And this is simply just an overweighting or underweighting index to the national average. And the national average is 1. So this construction industry line that you see here, this is basically saying, just from a location quotient perspective, that Nebraska is right on the national average for number of employees or jobs in 2021. And that is following an 8% growth over the last 5 years. And then over to the side here, we just have, we also hold that up against earnings per worker on an average basis. So ideally, if you're looking for that disposable income, juicing, as juice into the economy, we want to see the higher change in jobs along with higher absolute numbers and higher earnings per worker. So those are some of the correlations to look for as you kind of move through this visual.
So Michael, I'm going to take a look at this and leave it just the way it is, because I like this. So this is obviously dramatically affected by the pandemic, because the end line is 2021 jobs. And it tells a story that I think we know fundamentally in terms of why Nebraska's economy has stayed so strong. If you look at the green bars in terms of change in jobs, those are some of our very largest segments of our GDP in the state. Construction, professional, scientific, and technical, certainly real estate and rental, ag is certainly one of our largest industries. Finance and insurance is one of our largest industries. And you can go on. Manufacturing, which is in many ways our largest or second largest industry, has led the way, along with education and healthcare. Pretty significant, but and then on the bottom, we were aware that the COVID hit our hotels and our restaurants and our recreation areas the worst. And we also knew it hit our retail trade the worst. But what I'm looking for here, which I love your quotient based on the weighting, is the couple that pop out are management of companies and enterprises and transportation. These are two really important areas of our economy in terms of our weighting, and they were both down, and certainly transportation is really key for us. And so finding transportation employment, and I think that's a workforce issue. And also when we get to management and company and enterprises being down, again, I'm looking at, and I'm just guessing, but I'm looking at that, again, my empty nester syndrome with people leaving in their 50s. I want to know how many of those sorts of people at management levels were able to go to remote and move to other places, and how important it is to create an environment in Nebraska that is really attractive to remote executives. I'm just guessing, and so we've got to get into the data, but that's something I definitely want to look at.
That's a great point. And it probably, these visuals all tie together, especially workforce, jobs, and population related. And, one other theory here along those lines, Brian, is, maybe these folks are still retaining jobs in Nebraska, but working remotely because they're in the stage of their career where they can do that.
Well, I've got to do a sales job, Michael, because I'm 64. And my wife Leslie and I have had this conversation. Nebraska's our home for the duration, remote or not remote. This is where we want to be. So I just got to convince a lot of other people the same.
Awesome.
Okay, why don't we head to the next slide, Mike?
Okay, unemployment claims is next here. This really not a lot to say that one can't visualize here. This is initial claims and continued claims. As you can see, again, same idea with the labeling on the right. So continued claims obviously has this mountain through COVID. Initial claims is the red line on the bottom. And you can hover over these, and this is true for any of these time series charts. You can hover over these and get the actual values behind the data.
Mike, the interesting thing on this chart for me is I think there's a lot of businesses out there and a lot of people who are saying, well, we know there's 50, 80,000 jobs open in Nebraska, and we know we lost a lot of folks during the COVID, but they'll come back. They're just on unemployment right now. But what this tells us is they're not on unemployment. These are very low levels of initial claims and very low levels of continued claims at the end of the pandemic. There's no vast workforce out there that's on unemployment that's suddenly going to come running back. That's not the solution here. Nebraska is one of the hardest working states in the country, and all you have to do is look at this slide and you get that picture. We're going to see it in your next slide as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. You guys really do stand out in terms of labor force participation rate at 68.5%. That is very high. And as you mentioned, your unemployment rate in December was 1.3%. So yeah, this does present, challenges in your economy as well as others that we're seeing. Historically speaking, I guess I would just say that, struggle is the mother of invention, and it seems as though technology will inevitably end up picking up the slack for, this labor shortage that we're seeing, at least in industries where that's possible. We're seeing a lot of innovation in tech. to address this
Michael,
very problem that you're talking about.
That's the lowest unemployment rate. Some of those months, some is not only the lowest unemployment rate in the country, but the lowest unemployment rate in history in Nebraska. So the economy is coming out strong, but lacking labor. What I generally tell people when I'm asked this question is, how do we fix this? To me, there's really four key things. One is there's 3 areas where I think there's potential for picking up workforce. Clearly, one is those 100,000 people who don't have adults who don't have a high school degree, is training, upgrading skills, providing those things that restrict them from working, and really working to bring those folks fully employed to a fully employed status in the workforce. 2, we have over 200,000 people in our colleges and universities in this state. So just keeping more of that crowd could really mean thousands and thousands of additional people. They're our biggest recruiter to the state. And 3rd, ultimately, immigration is critical. And so ultimately, if Congress were ever to enact a nonpartisan or a bipartisan legal immigration system, not an illegal, because it's impossible to hire them, but a bipartisan legal immigration bill that brought thousands of people to Nebraska, that would be helpful. But then my 4th pillar is really your point, that in the end, unless you think this immigration bill is going to pass soon of that ilk, it's going to take massive investments in technology to really increase the productivity of our businesses to deal with this workforce issue. So I'm really looking at all 4 areas, but clearly we've got to bring a lot more technology into our business, because there just isn't a huge labor pool out there right now.
Yeah, you guys do have, Brian, one of the lowest unemployment rates that we do see in the nation. It's it's very true.
It's a tough road. So now you're going to get to some of our maps, and I love your maps. So show us some of your maps.
Okay, yeah, I'll just do a quick overview here on the map. And yeah, I would just invite folks like you said, Brian, to go to this URL and interact with this great dashboard on their own time. There's a lot of good data here.
Well, go up to Cherry County. So Cherry County is one I'm very familiar with. I grew up not far from there, and spend a lot of time in Cherry County these days. So we always think about the urban centers in the country, but look at Cherry County, 351 commuters out of 3,347. That's 10%. 10% of Cherry County's workers are commuters. It's amazing. We are a state that has a lot of employment dynamics going on. As I look at the state, I'm not surprised by sort of the I-80 corridor being darker, and this is where our larger job concentrations are. But there's also some places not on I-80, Norfolk and Columbus as example, with very high job concentration. And so sometimes we get in the mode in Nebraska of thinking, well, all our jobs are concentrated in the urban areas. Not quite true.
Yeah, and this heat map really can highlight that at a glance for you. So the next visual we have here is firm size and employment distribution. And this is really driving home that point of, the backbone of the economy in America is still small business. So 1 to 4 employees, that size of a business, it accounts for 42% of total businesses in the state of Nebraska, and the business count is 37,055. So go small business.
Yeah, so let me just put that in context for people, Michael. Assume we have 1 million employees. We have just a little more than 1 million, but let's assume for my math purposes, we've got 1 million employees in the state. That means that 424,000 work for companies or businesses with 4 employees or less. A lot of our jobs are in this segment. a lot of our jobs in this segment. And it's something that from an economic standpoint, we absolutely have to pay attention to. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of folks are hanging their own shingle and becoming freelance contractors too. This includes all the sole proprietors and things that would be self-employed as well. Job postings. So this is a 30-day, so a very near-term look at job postings on a year-over-year basis and trend. We like this chart because it's pretty. If there is a leading indicator to the hiring appetite in the region, it is, we feel, this 30-day job posting trend, without modeling out a forecast. So these are actual historical data over the last 30 days that shows relative to last year how many job postings. So you can see that 22 is outpacing 21 in terms of job postings this year. And we do update this data on a monthly basis. So
Michael, this is not good data for us. Last year, and it's interesting, last year I would have said on any given day we had 50,000. I understand this is job postings. There's lots of jobs that are unfilled that people just stop posting. But last year I would have said on any given day, I'm very comfortable saying that we had over 50,000 jobs vacant in Nebraska. This year, I think it's closer to 70 or 80,000 at least. This would tend to say that's the case, and the numbers are getting bigger. The numbers are getting bigger. They're not getting, the workforce issue is getting more difficult. It's not getting better.
Very true. Very true. I was wanting to put some silver lining on that, Brian, by thinking that maybe it's the entrepreneurial startups that are outpacing it. Maybe we're changing the.
No, Michael, and so what, from a chamber standpoint, what our philosophy has been on this is actually you can look at the demographics of the state, and we're going to have a population challenges for several more years, just knowing what the pipeline of young students are coming up through K through 12. We've really been on track this year to say, we need to do big and bolder things in the state from a public policy standpoint to really attract people, to really create this technology investment. And I think we haven't shared this with you, Michael, but there's a lot of things that we've been working on that are going to come out of the legislature this year. There's some other big projects that I think will be game changers. But it's clear that we just can't sit and watch this as a state. This problem is going to continue to get worse unless we take some pretty big actions. So we'll talk about that in some other webcasts. So take us through some other slides here.
Okay. Job postings by industry. This is really just drilling down. This is obviously an aggregate cumulative number here of all industry, just total unique job postings. But wouldn't it be nice to know what industries are posting and where that's changing on an industry level? So that's what this next slide or chart indicates. So it's job postings, same time frame. It's a 30-day look back. But we've broken it down by industry on a 2-digit NAICS level. So unclassified, that's probably not a great one to start with because there are a lot of job postings that they don't classify into industry, but let's take the second one, the professional, scientific, and technical services. In the last 30 days, you can see from an absolute number standpoint, not just percentage, but an absolute number standpoint of unique postings. This is a sector in your economy that it really has an appetite for new hires. So in terms of talent and training with programs, at least on a very short term, and if you could extrapolate that into a leading indicator going forward, this shows where your hotspots in the industry in terms of sectors are with new employment posting.
Yeah, a couple things on this one, Michael, is not shockingly, people ask me, well, where do you need people? And I always say, we need it across the board. I can look at this chart and say, if you gave us 30,000 people in Nebraska today, we could put them to work. I don't care what their particular profession is, what their skill sets are. We need people in almost every possible sector, but clearly in our biggest sectors, healthcare and social services, clearly part of it, manufacturing, finance, and insurance. These are some of our biggest employers in the state. We absolutely, it's across the board in terms of what we need, but filling those slots would be amazing in terms of what the effect would be on our economy going forward, not only in our urban areas, but in our rural areas as well. There's a lot of these industries that are in our more rural areas, and it would be huge.
Great. Yeah, and one could go up here and cross-reference with the salary, the average earnings per worker, and really extrapolate some multiplier effect and economic impact there.
Hey, I forgot to mention, Michael, up in that upper chart, there was something on average wage per industry, and in utilities it was sort of a huge number. That's a data issue in Nebraska, because the fact is that our utilities are government owned in Nebraska, and so the actual utility workers would show up in government. I don't know who it is that the class is classified as utility but doesn't work in our public utilities, but somebody out there makes $424,000, but our average utility worker does not make $424,000. The bulk of them would be listed in government.
Thanks for catching that. That's great input. Brian, was there anything more that you'd like to talk about?
Let's move to the next section.
Okay. So economic climate. This is probably not news to anyone who lives in the state, but this does just give sort of a 10-year look back, trending view on everything that you're feeling from a cost of living standpoint, at least within the bucket of housing costs. So home values, again, if you hover over this line, you can see, and we've updated this, I believe, February of 22. 230.
Michael, this is a good and bad slide. This is really a good and bad slide for homeowners. Yes, we're developing lots of equity in our homes. But no, we have high property taxes in Nebraska, and for homeowners, property taxes are sort of a cashless tax because there's no cash income coming in, yet you still have to pay the tax. This has been a struggle, but the bigger issue really is on the workforce side. Ensuring that there's affordable housing for young people moving to the state. As our home prices go up, it creates more and more pressure on this affordable housing issue. And as we toured the state last summer, and I'm interested as to go back out this summer, housing, and once you got past workforce, affordable housing was the number 2 issue among community and business leaders across the state in terms of, and it was tied to workforce, the ability to attract 18 to 34-year-olds to our communities.
Very true. It's a trend we're seeing everywhere right now. So down here is just a little bit more information. You can see over the past year, I mean, it's 14.7%, I believe. Yeah. Yep. Okay. State tax. Speaking of tax, Brian, here we go with the tax climate scorecard. So this visual has a drop down. You can see different components of the tax base. We can just click on sales tax. And these are ranked in terms of the national ranking. So we've highlighted Nebraska here in each query. And Brian, if you want me to drive this with any particular.
Well, give me corporate tax rank, because that's the one I'm looking at today. Yeah, 32. So we've got a debate in the legislature over taxes right now, and the issue, and you saw it even in the overall rate. It's hard to compete for both jobs and talent when your taxes aren't at least in the top 25, and ideally we'd like them to have be in the top 10 to 20. This is an issue we've got in the state, but the legislature's working on it this week. So I'm hoping that you've got some revisions here in another 60 days after the legislature acts this week.
That would be great. Send us those data, and we'll get this updated to a better form for you.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. And I'll give you credit if that actually happens.
The next one is productivity. And Brian, this was driven by you, so I'll let you talk through this.
Yeah, so this is really an interesting one. So we have a really hardworking employee base in Nebraska. It is really incredible how well and how hard the people in Nebraska work. But the issue for business ultimately is how does that apply to labor cost? And so when you start getting a gap that your labor cost is increasing at a much higher rate than your labor productivity, you're inherently going to make less profits over time, and you become less profitable as a business, and the state becomes less profitable. What you see is, probably you're seeing it nationally as well, is labor cost is increasing dramatically, which is a good thing. Higher wages generally is a good thing in the economy, but now this is truly inflation based, and you see those labor costs going up pretty dramatically. In order to sustain this growth in labor costs, we're going to have to increase labor productivity in this state, which again, I'm going back to, between this and the workforce numbers, I don't see any other alternative other than very substantial investments in technology in this state over the next 3 to 5 years. And as you know, we're in the public policy business. As we think about public policy, you know, clearly research and development and incorporation of technology innovation in our businesses needs to be in the forefront. It needs to be right up there with housing and childcare and attracting people, but also attracting technology and technology companies and incorporating technology into our core industries. It's just super clear here. We would like to sustain these higher labor costs because it helps build a much larger middle class. But boy, we've got to make some investments in technology too.
Next section, Brian, is the quality of life. So number 9 in emotional well-being, and we can cite some sources on this if you'd like, but these are great rankings.
Yeah, Michael, this is a great state to live. You need to move here. We're going to sell you on this. This is good stuff, but you've got some great data here on where people are moving to and where they're moving from. You're going to start with commutes, but I'm going to have you slide down. We all know we've got low commutes in Nebraska. Slide down one more slide. I find this really interesting.
Yeah, this is kind of a long slide, but I'll slip down here so everyone can see the entire visual and then come back up to the top. This is essentially showing top 20 counties. We could have taken this further, but on a net migration basis. So this is after you weigh inflows and outflows, where each county lands or I should say where folks from the state of Nebraska are moving to on a county basis outside of the state, or coming into Nebraska from these various counties throughout the nation.
So Michael, these reds are where people are coming from. And it's sort of, now I realize this is 1 year, 2019, so it's just a snapshot. So whether this is true in 2021 or not, I don't know. But it's interesting because we have this, what I'll now call a myth, that we're getting most of our net migration from within 500 miles of the state. This would say that's untrue. And to break down these counties for people, these top red counties of where we're getting people are, let me give you the cities we're talking about. Atlanta, Georgia, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Louisville, Kissimmee, Florida, and Bakersfield, California. None of those within 500 miles of the state. I look at that list, Atlanta, Fayetteville, Louisville, Kissimmee, and Bakersfield, and I say to myself, probably a lot to do with business migration. Businesses that have offices in or locations in those places, but also have locations in Nebraska and started to make bigger investments in Nebraska. Don't know it. And then the one right after that, Hidalgo County, Texas, that's immigration. That's the Rio Grande. And so when you look at the in-migration, my sense is when people ask me, does it matter that, in a workforce short environment, should we continue to try to attract companies? My answer is yes, 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 particularly companies with the kinds of jobs that attract people. I believe these people are moving for jobs, and not just within a 500-mile radius, but nationwide, and that we need to create a much bigger presence as a state in marketing our state nationwide. We need to create a much better effort to bring companies and their people to the state. This is the sort of migration we need. And then when you go to the blues on the bottom, where are they going? You're going to see Maricopa County, Arizona, Scottsdale, Phoenix. These are people retiring. El Paso County, Colorado, Johnson County, Texas. Most of these are retirees, but I also see the Utahs and the Virginias and some of the Texas, but Kansas and Minnesota. These are also jobs. We're losing people to jobs. And so jobs matter in this migration process. And I think this chart brought it home to me.
That's great. And one point to note here, in case anyone may be wondering, well, why are these numbers so low? It is just important to note, I'll just repeat that this is net migration as it's labeled up here.
Yep.
So this could be thousands, if not tens of thousands on a exchange, but the net is what we're capturing here.
Michael, this is great data. I mean, fabulous data. And this is exactly what the Chamber Foundation wants to do, is just put nonpartisan data out there that makes us more informed as we start to deal with these decisions. And I know we're going to continue to refine this. Holly, we've got a few minutes left for just questions from the group for either Michael or me. So are there any questions out there?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We do have a few questions that came in through the presentation. First and foremost, are most of the family farm operations in the state included in the 37,000 small businesses employing under 4 people?
I'll scroll up to that slide here. I'm assuming we're talking about this distribution of businesses by employee size. So yes, this would include any business that's registered at the state, whether that entity is sole proprietorship, partnership, S Corp, conventional corp, C Corp, LLC. I'm 99% sure this data is capturing everything that has a registered business within the state, even down to that sole proprietor.
We have a couple of sourcing questions. What is this platform using for the source of job postings? Indeed, other places. Can you give us an idea?
Yeah, great question. Most of this data is pulled through a provider that we use, and you can see here in every one of these slides, or I should say charts, we do cite our source, MZ, and just backing down to this one, this was BLS data from the distribution of business size. So MZ is an aggregator of all sorts of data, including census, BLS data, many job posting sites data. And some of you may or may not be aware, but MZ recently merged with Burning Glass. And Burning Glass was probably the gold standard for, among a few other companies, for job posting aggregation. So there are literally tens of thousands of sources that they pull from the local posting level, being newspapers, to the national site level posting sources like the Indeeds or the LinkedIns.
Another question related to the source of the data for emotional well-being and work environment happiness.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned that that I could cite the source of that and post it. I'm not exactly sure where that source came from, but it is a published and reliable source.
Yeah,
it's a great point that we should cite that down in the data source.
Michael, we should turn a site on this. I don't know what it is either, but these types of things typically show up in U.S. News and World Report and Forbes and what's the wallet one, Holly, that we see up at the
Wallet Hub, right?
Wallet Hub, things like that.
Check back. Maybe is a good answer. We'll have it well cited for you. A couple of questions related to how tough it would be to compare some of our data with either regional or other U.S. data, maybe help identify pockets of population or talent that could be out there available, or things we may be struggling with that aren't unique compared to other states in the region or area.
Yeah, I would say, if I'm understanding the question correctly, and Brian, please elaborate on this, but location quotient would be the only thing we would be providing to you guys that has some sort of a baseline index to the national.
Yeah, so Michael, I think the question might be also getting at workforce and where all our members, where are these people that we can possibly hire? And what I can assure you is, talking to my peer colleagues at the other chambers across the country, every one of the 50 states has this workforce shortage. So we're all fighting over the same people. I do think the question, something that would be interesting, while this is focused on Nebraska, is, and we have our migration numbers, is where are the states that people are moving out of versus the states that people are moving to? And that might be something we think about adding to this, because there are definite states where people are moving out of right now and definite states where they're moving to. And because we've been using this in our conversations about taxes, if you take the top 10 states people are moving to and the fastest growing economies, they tend to be low tax states. And if you look at not always, but they tend to be that. And if you look at where they're moving from, they tend to be highly urban and high tax. And COVID sort of created an environment where everybody decided they could work anywhere they wanted to work. And so if you're in a high tax state, and with the trend to move to rural environments, you see some of the states that traditionally would have in-migration are now having out-migration.
Thank you. We did have a point made about tracking income changes in rural areas of the state, and that it could be quite possible that sometimes family farms who don't have official employees aren't necessarily qualifying as a business, and therefore, those income changes are not necessarily being tracked. It's a good question related to some of the more rural income trends and what is included in the baseline numbers and what isn't.
Yeah, that is true. Clearly, there's a difference between compensation, employee income, and business income, even for a LLC or a partnership that's in the ag business sometimes, or a sub S. Well, we can take a look at that. Clearly, the ag economy has been very strong the last couple of years, and we're thinking it's going to be continue to be real strong this year. This does not equate to the GDP numbers, which we could also show. It's just jobs. As we go forward, and I think this is an important part, I think as we start incorporating more technology in our core industries, and let me just take agriculture and manufacturing, two of the most important. In the blueprint report, one of the things they identified was agriculture and manufacturing are two of the places where everybody has predicted technology is going to have the biggest effect. And so we're not far from precision agriculture with driverless vehicles and all of that. And same thing in manufacturing, plants that are end-to-end robots and those sorts of things. That innovation is going to spawn multiples of jobs in the technology area around agriculture and manufacturing, and because those are located in some of our rural areas, I think that technology innovation boom is going to have a very big effect over the coming 5 to 10 years if we are successful at it. And these job numbers, when we start looking at them across the state and that job concentration map, it will have an effect, but it'll be an interesting thing to watch, certainly something that we're keyed in on.
Another question about whether earnings per worker data could be compared to other states by industry.
Yeah, it definitely could. I would like to maybe take this opportunity to back up for just 1 second. Agriculture, yes, that is a very unique industry sector, not only in the way ag accounting is done, but also just in terms of any pass-through income. Any pass-through income to an entity that is obviously profits isn't necessarily taken into consideration in this earnings per worker. This is primarily payroll number. So just to clarify that.
Yeah. Michael, you're starting to get a taste of Nebraska here. It's a wonderful place to live, but everybody wants to be number one compared to our other states, particularly this one right across the border called Iowa. And so you see all these questions, how do we compare to other states? It's in our DNA. That's just who we are.
Yeah, maybe some great data to add to this if you guys would like to benchmark a few of these things.
Yeah, I think we're actually getting a few different comments in about, well, it would be great if we could compare this with that, including the top 25, largest counties and their strengths and weaknesses and things like that. So I think we can see the future of a great partnership moving forward on data that can really help us kind of drill into what opportunities and challenges we're facing and maybe some ways we can get around those. One last question kind of before we sign off. Can you give us an idea of how often this data is updated?
Yeah, and that answer is it depends. Our software is tied to data sources via an API, but as you can see pretty clearly here, a lot of this is government source data. So depending on the data point, the frequency of the updates varies, in fact, quite dramatically. We actually get, I think I mentioned earlier, we get updated job postings on a daily basis. We do have this updated on the dashboard on a monthly basis for job postings. But then, there are things that are government data updated from BLS that are quarterly. Some things are semi-annually, some data points are annually. So we update the data, the best answer I can give with that caveat. We update the data as often as it's updated for us.
Well, with that, Holly, I'm going to close this. First, I'm going to thank Michael and his company eIMPACT for helping us with this process. It's really been great. As you can see, this is just the start of what we really want to do as a chamber. We wake up every morning and think about Nebraska's economy and our competitiveness and where we're strong and where we're weak and where we can do better. But we want to be data-based. Too much of the public policy discussion is emotional based and not really data-based. So So Michael's company is giving us some insights that we think are important. We're going to continue to refine this and expand this. This is going to be a big deal. The Chamber Foundation providing nonpartisan data is really going to be important to that. And I hopefully will bring better insights, not only for public policymakers, but for our business leaders across the state. So I want to thank everybody involved in this process, and thank everybody for listening today. Again, you can get to this site at anychamber.com, click on the foundation link, and then click on the dashboard link, and you're right there. And this will be updated periodically. So appreciate it and have a great day. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all.